The aftermath of a tragedy provokes powerful emotions that move through our minds and our bodies like a raging river. We may feel vulnerable, unable to control what is happening within ourselves. As many of you know, our beloved community of Highland Park was devastated after a gunman opened fire at an Independence Day parade, killing 7 people. Our NorthShore team members treated 39 of the shooting victims, and many in our communities are struggling to cope with the stress reactions. We invite you to stay with us for these next few minutes as we speak with Dr. Lindsay Fazio, a NorthShore psychologist, to learn how to cope, to accept, and appreciate our humanness as she walks us through the healing process. This is a special episode of the Healthy You podcast. I'm Carolyn Starks.
And I'm Jon Hillenbrand.
Thank you, Dr. Fazio, for being with us today.
Sure.
Can you tell us what you do at NorthShore?
I'm a clinical psychologist, but I also wear a couple of different hats within the organization. So I am the well-being lead for the North Region, which is the team that's responsible for implementing our internal support programs, as well as looking at other systematic opportunities for us to keep our team members well while they're working. I'm also the director of behavioral medicine in the family medicine department and the director of physician well-being for the professional staff office.
Nice.
So you're in high demand, I'm sure, after everything that's happened. Well, let's get right to it. I feel it's normal to have a wide range of thoughts and feelings and reactions after what happened on July 4th at the parade. But can you walk us through the myriad emotions of what people may be feeling and what you're hearing from them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there isn't any one way that's the right way to respond after trauma, but certainly we would expect to see a cluster of experiences. So we know that trauma really affects our mood. So we would see people being irritable, anger. Anger is a really big, profound emotion that we've heard consistently from people lately. That we would see our cognitions or the way that our brain is functioning starting to change a little bit. So that looks like having trouble focusing or having trouble paying attention. In the workplace, we see people running late for meetings or forgetting that they had meetings or appointments in the first place, just because all of our brain power is really focused on processing the trauma and managing all of the adrenaline. The other signs that we might see afterward is a feeling of just disbelief or like being shell-shocked as we try to make sense of what did we just live through and what does that mean for me. And then also we would start to see folks that are struggling with how they're sleeping at night and what their appetite is like.
So we talked a little bit about the physical signs. Profound sadness, I'm sure, too, and grief. Does it matter if you were at the parade or not? Or is it an individual thing that just even caring about something like this or being close to it in your community can affect you?
That's a good question. Yeah, so when it comes to trauma, the closer you are to the event, we certainly worry about the increased likelihood of developing something like an adverse stress event or adverse stress reaction or post-traumatic stress disorder. But what is traumatizing to each of us could be different, right? So even just hearing about what took place at the parade or hearing about our neighbors or our friends' experience, even that type of vicarious hearing could be traumatizing.
Can you explain what post-traumatic stress disorder is?
Sure. So PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder is a cluster of experiences that someone develops after either directly experiencing a traumatic or extremely stressful event or vicariously or secondary experiencing an event. So, for example, a healthcare worker could just hear stories or be taking care of a patient that participated or was a witness to a stressful or traumatic event and then could develop secondary PTSD.
So let's talk about some triggers and what, for example, if someone had experienced the parade and unfortunately was either a victim or knew a victim or just witnessed horrific events. We're a couple weeks past it now, and I'm wondering if they hear a certain, like firecrackers or a band or something, can you explain what a fight or flight response might be what they might be experiencing? And then we'll talk about how to get out of that.
Okay. So I heard you asking about I think of them as two separate things.
Okay.
So there's fight or flight and then triggers.
Okay.
So fight or flight is the reaction that naturally happens when we feel unsafe, right? So from like an evolutionary perspective, that's what kicked in when a bear was chasing us and we had to get ourselves to safety. Fast forward to current day, and bears don't chase us as often, but now we have things like mass shootings. And so that's that reaction, the nervous system reacting so that we can act quickly to get ourselves to safety.
And then what about the triggers?
So triggers are, so we think of triggers as an opportunity to come in from our five senses. So we could be triggered by sounds. So you mentioned like the sound of firecrackers, certainly. It could also be something that we hear, see, smell, taste, or our vision, so what we see happening. Mm-hmm. And so if you think about what it would be like to be at that parade, it could be large gatherings. It could be the sounds that are loud, like a firecracker or a gunshot. It could be even attached to what somebody was eating while they were at the parade or listening to the news about the parade.
So if that leads to anxiety or a fight or flight response, what is happening within that individual? Like, is their heart rate increasing? Are they just going silent? Are they crying?
Yeah, so what happens when we're triggered? Mm-hmm. So what the body is thinking and what the mind is thinking is, oh, here's a similar experience I had before when I became unsafe.
Oh.
And so that's, at the most basic level, that's what your body is going through. And what it looks like in action could be very different. So some people may become quite anxious or irritable. You may notice people's hands, a little bit restless or tremory. They may start to shake or cry or have some change in their emotional expression. But how everybody is triggered is different, and the way it presents itself is different.
Okay.
And unless you're attuned or aware of what's happening, somebody may misinterpret what they're observing in their friend or their family member.
For sure, or not see anything else. And then later on that evening, somebody shares, oh, I'm sorry, I was having a panic attack at that restaurant, or, and nobody knew or knows.
Yeah, so we don't have a billboard on our forehead that says what we're thinking and feeling.
Right, and it must be extremely scary just to be in that position and have, these triggers or this fight or flight response come up later. Can you, and this is really important, so let's talk about how people who are experiencing this at any level, mild, moderate, severe, how can they calm their bodies down, if they are in a public place, mm-hmm. or, and then if they're at home and by themselves.
Okay, so a couple of the first steps that we often teach people to calm themselves down. First is just to remember to breathe. So I'm sure you've been in an experience where you feel anxious or on edge, and all of a sudden you realize you've been holding your breath for a while.
Right. Yes, that has happened. Right.
Yeah. So we just ask people to stop, to pause, and to breathe. And the way that we teach people to breathe, there's a couple of different strategies. Mm-hmm. One being something we call diaphragmatic breathing, which is essentially what we learned in high school choir, right, where you take deep belly breaths. Mm-hmm. There's two others. One is called 4-7-8, or another is box breathing. So box breathing is great to learn and to do in the workplace because there's lots of squares around us, whether it's the shape of our desk or the door. And you simply breathe in, going up the left side of the door, exhaling or holding across the top of the door, and then exhaling down the right side of the door, and then holding again across the bottom.
I actually did that during labor. And
You did?
That works.
Yep.
That's cool.
And you draw, like, I remember drawing a square on my leg, on my knee.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. It really works. And if you can't remember any of this, just remember to breathe. Take deep breaths in. And hold it, maybe, and then let it go, right? I mean, if, you don't want someone thinking, I can't remember how to breathe.
Yeah. So breathing is a good strategy. Actually, breathing is a good coping skill for any phase of life. So my poor children have had lots of coping skills taught to them throughout their little lives. So this is a great skill for kids to learn to do also. Depending on what they're interested in, you could teach them to do like lion breaths. So you go as they exhale.
Right.
Cute.
That is cute.
Or pretending like
effective.
they're blowing up a big bubble with gum.
Oh, yeah.
So same thing, just speaks to more what their, developmental interest might be.
That's cool.
And then how can we help people if they're experiencing this anxiety in front of us? Is there a way? Or should you intervene or not?
Yeah. I think if you have something to offer to help somebody, certainly, right? We need to do a good job of taking care of each other. So if you notice, I think the first thing I'd ask is that people just check in and make sure that person is actually experiencing what they think they might be. And are they comfortable with you moving into their psychological or emotional space and offer to help them? So sometimes when you're anxious or being triggered, right, your brain has a moment where, things feel very scary and out of control. And so somebody could offer, may I do a breathing exercise with you? Would you like to just sit down? So another activity we often teach people is something called grounding.
Oh, right.
Does that sound familiar?
What do you see? Name one thing you can hear. I forgot about that. But go ahead. Explain it.
So that just kind of brings you right to the present. So you think about, tell me or say something that you smell, something that you see, something that you hear. So you're asking people to engage in their five senses, which just helps them kind of pull back into the present. The other thing I like to do with kiddos or adults is just to ask them to hold something in their hand, like a pen, paperclip, rock, and just to, rub it, manipulate it in their hand and to try to focus their attention on what that experience, the sensory experience in their hand.
That sounds
Great advice.
Yeah, really good advice. I do think the most courageous people in the world are those who face their emotions and head on and say, I'm going to do this hard work. It feels horrible.
It's very scary.
Right, but they gain the confidence and they come out of it on the other end. It's just extremely courageous, and I don't think we say that enough, But having said that, I also think it's important to identify the emotions, like give a name to what you're feeling. So, which for some people, they don't know what it is. So do you agree with that, number one? And how can we identify what we're feeling and put a name to it?
That's a good question. Yeah, some of our feelings have a fine line between them, like anger and sadness.
Right.
Sometimes they feel similar or one may lead to the other. So I think it's fine, right? If you don't know exactly what you're feeling, that's okay. Name that, right? Name, I'm feeling confused, or I'm feeling my heart race and my cheeks feel hot. Whatever your experience is, it just helps us to develop our emotional intelligence and to get comfortable just sitting in the discomfort.
I like that idea of emotional intelligence. I remember several years ago, somebody told me, and it actually worked. At the end of the day, I was thinking like, man, I felt worried all day, but like nothing's worrying me. And then they said to think about what were the thoughts going through your brain all day? Like think about what were you, and then it was easier to pick out like, oh, okay,
Yeah, our thoughts are very powerful. So when we use a treatment strategy called cognitive behavioral therapy, one of those essential components is helping people understand the power of their thoughts, what they're thinking about, and then how has that thought affected their emotion or their behavior. So sometimes we may just be like percolating on something or thinking about all the chores you have to get done at home when you get home from work. So maybe that's what led to you feeling more anxious or on edge.
Are people afraid to experience emotions? I bet you see a spectrum, right, of people who it's right there at the surface. They wear their heart on their sleeve, and others who have trouble or are afraid of expressing them. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I don't know that it's fair to say people are afraid of it, but everybody has a different comfort level with their emotions, and right, we're raised in different environments where we're taught to experience things differently or to be comfortable or uncomfortable with different things. So I think a lot of it is our personal choice, but it's also the environment and the culture in which we're raised.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, I noticed with like emergency room people, I asked them once at one of the hospitals, how do you guys deal with traumatic events? And they were like, we just move on.
Yeah, which is exactly what you want your emergency room staff to do, right? You want them to be calm under pressure and to be able to adequately manage their adrenaline that they're experiencing so that it doesn't affect the way that they're thinking or cloud their judgment. So in a lot of ways, that's a really healthy adaptive skill, as long as, you have the ability to turn it on and off based on what the situation is.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So we're several days past this horrifying event, and this traumatic event, and I was wondering what coping advice you have for ourselves and others we interact with, especially those who are so close to what happened.
So coping and dealing with trauma it's a long haul process, right? It's definitely not a sprint, although you do think about what do you do in the short term to make sure that you're taking good care of yourself. So especially in the short term, I think about, are people still eating? Are they staying hydrated? Are they doing their normal day-to-day activities? Participating in your routine is very comforting and allows your brain and a body a distraction from all of what you're going through. So I also think about if you're able to exercise. I'm not a big fan of exercise, although it's really good for you. But if you can get up and move, that's very helpful. Also, I worry about people isolating themselves because then, right, you can kind of get sucked up into your experience and lost in your thoughts, where we know that social connection and participating with people, being around people is really quite healthy and good for us. Humans are meant to be connected to others.
If you have a fear, you mentioned, getting out. So somebody might have a fear now of going outside. And finding that balance of how far should I push myself, that's difficult, I would think.
Yeah, that is difficult. Certainly from a therapeutic perspective, our goal is always to try to engage people in their life in a way that's meaningful to them so that people don't feel limited by their thoughts and feelings. But it's tough, right? We're in an environment now where we have to wonder, are we safe? Do I feel safe? What does this mean? So even some of our activities that maybe we took for granted before, like going to the grocery store, I think people are questioning, am I safe doing these things now?
So is there hope? We need some hope, I think, and we're looking to you for people who are experiencing trauma and the aftermath of trauma and feeling like themselves again. You know, for those out there who are feeling like I'll never be the same again, which might be true, but you know, when their anxiety is all over to the right, how can they put it back in that middle ground?
Yeah.
Or grief or anger, or whatever it is.
Yeah, whatever their experience might be.
Right.
So offering hope, I mean, there's lots of treatment options that we know are very effective. For some people, participating in mental health treatment is the best way to go for them to get back to what they want their life to be like. And for others, they may not need that, right? They may have access to other resources or support through school or church or their families. And that's what they need at that point in time. So, right, we experience stressful, traumatic events multiple times over the course of our life. And yet we're pretty resilient and find ways to get back up and to keep moving forward.
Is there anything else you'd like to mention that we haven't covered? I know you've spoken to and have helped a lot of people get through traumatic events, including this one.
We've talked about healthy ways to cope, but not as much about unhealthy ways to cope.
Okay.
So we might as well just put that on the table.
That's a very good idea.
So I guess when I say that, what I mean is, right, we're really flooded with thoughts and feelings. And at our fingertips, we have things that will quiet a lot of those thoughts and feelings, whether it's alcohol or unhealthy activity, like eating more than we should or eating things we know we're not supposed to, or even, using drugs or some sort of illicit substance. So certainly those might be tempting strategies to quiet things and try to, bring yourself a sense of relief in the meantime, but in the long run, certainly will only wreak more havoc for people.
That's important to know.
Some people engage in sort of like internal revenge fantasies. What is that? Where does that lie in terms of healthy or unhealthy coping strategies?
Well,
even if it doesn't go anywhere, even if it's just in their own minds.
Yeah, I mean, I could imagine how, when something really horrible happens, that somebody would want revenge, right? Or to right the wrong. That seems like a natural feeling. I'm sure most of us have contemplated how would that happen. Mm-hmm. But in the end, I think we have to just think about, is that a fantasy or, is that a thought, or are we actually putting some more thought and effort behind that? And so I hope that people don't get stuck in that thought pattern where that might really redirect them towards negativity or kind of derail the healing process. So if you're somebody who's having a lot of those kind of intrusive negative thoughts, I would just encourage you to redirect them into something that's more positive and more focused on healing, or share them with someone like myself or a mental health professional that can help you kind of walk through those and quiet them.
What advice would you give people who maybe next year are thinking about not going to the parade?
Well, I mean, we're thinking that ourselves, right? I think
Sure.
Certainly,
Right.
I've contemplated that.
Yeah.
4th of July is my most favorite holiday.
Oh, really?
I love it. It's meant, it's a time to get together with your family and your friends and celebrate and enjoy being outside when it's finally nice in Chicago. So I think just as somebody who's thinking about that for my own self, you just have to ask yourself, does this help me with healing and moving forward, or does it not? And on the other hand, how do you feel about allowing some person who intended to do harm to take something away from you?
Yeah, it's true. So you were part of authoring an article that's on Healthy You right now. Is that right?
That is right.
Yeah,
Yep.
I saw that. So if anyone wants to read that article, it's really good. We'll put a link to it in the description.
Yeah, it's good to have just that information right in front of you. But I liked a lot of things you said today. which were, some of the highlights I felt were getting back to your routine as much as you can, possibly letting yourself feel the feelings and name them if you can. Breathe. If you're in a state of whatever, and I would say that's the first thing, just to remember to breathe, and seek help. Certainly, I think everyone in their lives at some point would benefit from a session or two.
Yeah, I'm biased, obviously. I think we all need therapists. So
I mean, you have somebody who will listen to you objectively, and who's educated on how to help you. I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah, I feel like if your thoughts are only amongst yourself, they're stuck in a room. But if you can share it with someone else, maybe you can let out some of the bad thoughts and let some new thoughts in there that might solve a problem for you.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I like that.
I do too, because I remember always telling my kids too when they were little, say what you're scared of. Like, let's talk about it. Say what it is, because you're giving it more power if you don't say it.
Mm-hmm. And it gets bigger, right? The longer it stays inside of you, the bigger and bigger it gets. So like when I talk to children about their worries about or anxiety, so we try to release the worry and then shrink it back down.
Oh, nice.
That's good.
And releasing the worries by tell me what it is. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Mm-hmm. For some people, talking about thoughts and feelings feels pretty uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. So there's other ways to express yourself, whether it's through music or art or movement. There's other ways to help your mind heal.
Well, thank you once again for being here. I mean, your information and your knowledge is invaluable during this time, and we're so thankful and grateful for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for having me. And I hope just by people listening to our conversation today that if any of it resonates or feels like where you're at, that they'll hear my voice, and I'm not real scary or intimidating, either in person or sounding, and that might make people more comfortable and willing to pick up the phone and to go and talk to somebody.
If people wanted to talk to you or to one of your colleagues, what's the best way to reach you guys?
So they're probably not going to talk to me directly, but certainly at NorthShore, we have a really fantastic Department of Psychiatry and Psychology that has wonderful therapists, psychologists, and psychiatrists that are able and willing to help. And there's also plenty of community agencies. Certainly since July 4th, a lot of local agencies and local practices have opened up their doors to the community. And so there's lots and lots of people out there that care deeply and want to help people.
That's great.
So northshore.org, and then you could just put in the search bar psychiatry department. Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you have any topics that you'd like us to discuss, email us at publicrelations@northshore.org, and we'll be happy to get to those topics for you.
You can also follow us on social media at North Shore Web on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook.
Stay safe, and see you next time.